The causes of the Civil War, a paper slide project. The Missouri Compromise of 1820. This was when Maine was admitted as a free state and Missouri as a slave state to keep the balance of slave states and free states balanced.
Tariffs and nullifications in the 1830s. By the 1830s, sectionalism was becoming a bigger issue. The tariffs of abominations made it worse. Southerners claimed that it helped the North with their industry and only harmed them by making prices higher for farmers. Congress passed a high tariff in 1832, and this led to Southerners claiming states' rights. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina urged for nullification and that states have the right to protect themselves from the national government. As a last resort, it was said that states could secede from the Union. Jackson viewed these tariffs as a threat to the U.S. In 1833, finally, Congress made a compromise tariff, and this crisis came to an end.
Nat Turner's Rebellion, 1831. Nathaniel Turner was a black American slave who was allowed to learn reading, writing, and religion. His education would later aid him in gathering fellow slaves as followers, encouraging them to aid him in a rebellion against his master and other white slave owners. This would later be known as the only effective slave rebellion in U.S. history.
Manifest Destiny in the 1840s. This was when Americans thought that they had a certain fate, a certain destiny to follow, and that was to take over more lands. And
The Wilmot Proviso. The Wilmot Proviso proposed that slavery would be outlawed in the West, inspired from the trauma of the Mexican-American War. What ended up happening was that it did not prove to be successful, but it almost outlawed slavery. It also somewhat encouraged people to lean toward abolitionism.
The Free Soil Party of 1848. The Free Soil Party, formed in 1848, was created by supporters of the unsuccessful 1846 Wilmot Proviso, and was thusly short-lived itself. Though this group did not believe in the eradication of slavery where it already existed, they were strong advocates for keeping the newly claimed lands in the West slavery-free.
the Compromise of 1850. This was where they made a compromise to try to stop a war from breaking out between the North and South and trying to mask sectionalism.
Famous abolitionist. An abolitionist is a person who focuses on the abolition of a practice or institution, especially capital punishment or, formerly, slavery. In the next slides, it is especially important to respect the abolitionists who worked to end the harsh and long span of slavery. William Lloyd Garrison. He was a famous abolitionist around the time of the Civil War. He was the co-founder and editor of the abolitionist newspaper called The Liberator, and continued having them published until it was abolished by the constitutional amendment after the Civil War. One of his quotes is, "Enslave the liberty of but one human being, and the liberties of the world are put in peril." Sarah and Angelina Grimke. The Grimke sisters, despite growing up in a slave-bearing family, grew to despise slavery and became abolitionists. They worked to enroll their mixed-race nephews in school in the North and converted to Quakerism. They spoke out in the anti-slavery movement and were also well-known because they were female abolitionists. Their famous quotes include, "I know nothing of a man's rights or of a woman's rights. Human rights are all that I recognize." Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe was a well-known abolitionist and author. She is best remembered from writing her book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which depicted slavery as a moral evil. This piece quickly grew into the best-selling novel of the 19th century. In addition, it inspired many Northerners to join the abolitionist cause. She ended up writing more than 30 books in her entire life, and with these and her public speaking against slavery, she definitely played a role in working to abolish it.
Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman was a black American woman who escaped slavery in 1849, leaving behind her family, but this was not her only attempt to flee. She would later return to the South via the Underground Railroad at least 19 more times to free her family and fellow slaves. This Underground Railroad was a network of passages held secret as a way for Southern slaves to escape to free states in Canada with the help of sympathizers.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act used popular sovereignty to give the residents of the territory the right to choose which one to go with, and this ended the Missouri Compromise.
Bleeding Kansas. Bleeding Kansas was when a war broke out between Kansas and Missouri when Missouri residents illegally voted. The issue was over whether or not Kansas should be admitted as a slave or free state. After the war, Kansas was admitted to the Union as a free state.
Formation of the Republican Party. Come 1854, the current opposing political party to the Democrats, the Whigs, had become weak and needed to regroup and gain new interest in their beliefs. In doing so, they formed the Republican Party as a replacement to the Whig Party. This party strongly opposed slavery and would gain supporters from the Free Soil Party and, later, Abraham Lincoln.
Dred Scott versus Sanford was when a slave named Dred Scott sued for his freedom after traveling with his master from Missouri to Wisconsin. This also brought up two major questions. Does Congress have the power to decide on slavery in the territories? And is the Missouri Compromise constitutional?
The Lincoln-Douglas debates. These were debates between Lincoln and Douglas around the time of the Civil War in Illinois concerning slavery. Douglas was of the Democracy Party, Lincoln a Republican. This gained Lincoln's popularity for the presidential election.
John Brown's reign. In 1859, a white abolitionist named John Brown conjured a plan to initiate an armed slave rebellion, but his methods were unstable. As a result, he would not gain much support for his mission beyond his 7 sons. As it was predicted, this plan to capture an armory was a suicide mission and would end in the deaths of all involved.
The election of Abraham Lincoln. This was when Abraham Lincoln was elected, and the South was upset about it because Abraham Lincoln was against slavery.
South Carolina secedes from the Union. The election of 1860 was said to be a final straw for the South. Republicans voted for Abraham Lincoln, who argued for the Free Soil Party and a strong national government. Southerners assumed slavery would be abolished and considered seceding or breaking away from the Union. South Carolina was the first to do so. This leads right up to the point where the first shots are fired at Fort Sumter, which marked the beginning of the American Civil War.
Shots fired at Fort Sumter. In 1859, a white abolitionist named John Brown conjured April 1861, the first battle of Fort Sumter would take place when the Confederate artillery, led by Brigadier General Beauregard, bombarded Major Robert Anderson's Union, as small as the incomplete fort in which it took place. These shots would later be known as the first of the American Civil War, or that which started its beginning. But no casualties occurred during these Confederate bombardment, the first to attack at sunrise.
That was our project. Thank you for watching.